Good evening. Today we are doing a research case study keynote presentation by me, Marlene, for New York Times Company versus Sullivan, as well as Gertz versus Robert Welch Incorporated. Part 1, the New York Times Company versus Sullivan. The parties involved are the New York Times, which is the publication, and the police commissioner of Montgomery at the time, Sullivan. The facts. What are some of the facts of this case study? The facts are that the New York Times had published an article, an ad, a full-page ad about the civil unrest in the South against civil rights protesters getting further aggravated by the police department, especially in Montgomery, Alabama, where the Montgomery Police Department had treated Dr. Martin Luther King and many of the other protesters incorrectly. They had claims that the Montgomery Police Department had arrested Martin Luther King 7 times and that truckloads of police were taken or stormed into Alabama state colleges and aggravated the students for protesting, which was an exaggerated statement. Why did Sullivan feel like his reputation was being damaged by the New York Times publication? He felt as if it was referring to him in a public way. He felt that it was in the way in which the police was being used, using their authority to treat civil unrest was badly represented. He felt that the ad was an attack on the police force and the police forces at the time. He felt that the publication was an exaggeration and should not have been written, had not written something that was untrue. Since Sullivan was a public official, what did he have to prove in this case? He had to prove that he felt the need to protect the integrity of not only himself but the Alabama Police Department against libel, which was against an Alabama law that protected that. What was the U.S. Supreme Court's decision and why did they make that decision? The decision that they sided with the newspaper because it states that the law was unconstitutional and went against the First Amendment. He had no proof that it was written about him or against him or the police department, which would actually not go against the libel law. So the next case is part 2, which is Gertz versus Robert Welch Incorporated. So here we have who are the parties in this case, who is the petitioner, and the private person. Was it a private person or public figure? Robert Welch Incorporated is the publisher of the American Opinion, the magazine that falsely claimed that the case was conspiracy against local law enforcement. The petitioner was Nelson's family, the petitioners were petitioned by Nelson's family, who hired Robert Welch to represent them in court. They were public figures, but they were not public figures. But Welch was a well-known attorney at the time. What were the alleged defamatory statements about Gertz in the American Opinion article? The article claimed that Welch had made the call for Nucho and called him a communist fronter with a long criminal record, none of which was actually true. What was done to confirm the accuracy of these allegations against Gertz? There was almost nothing done to prove that this was right or even verified. The publisher did not do any background information check on Gertz, claiming that they had done extensive research on the case of the police officer, but not the actual case itself, not the actual attorney themselves. Gertz had no criminal background and had no ties to Marxism or the Communist Party, and had no way of actually aligning themselves with said party. How do you think these allegations affected Gertz's reputation? I feel like his reputation would have been tarnished, and his loss of credibility would certainly be labeled as a communist, even if there were no indications to the like, no actual no actual proof that that was the case. He would be the public opinion of him at that time would be further fueled by the fear and the anger towards anything about the Communist Party or anything reported as Marxism. What would I have done differently than watch to avoid the lawsuit? I would have done further research on Gertz, research on the case of the police officer, and I would try to reach out to the family of the deceased. I would give my sincere sympathies. I would try to learn and to understand the family's viewpoint on the case and how it affected them and what some of the facts were according to people who were actually there at the time. I would have done more research on what libel is state to state and how it could be able to be used in cases such as this, or in any case that would need to use the libel law. What is my state's defamation law? Well, I live in the state of Wisconsin, so the state of Wisconsin states the standard elements of defamation in Wisconsin are a false statement communicated by speech, conduct, or in writing to a person other than the one defamed, and the communication is unprivileged and tends to harm one's reputation, lowering him or her to the estimation of the community or deferring third parties from associating or dealing with him or her. Wisconsin state law's legislature doesn't really have a clear-cut indication as to how these laws can be used correctly because they don't really have much practice in them. It does state in the legislature that these cases do exist and they have gone to the courts. However, it is kind of hard to win them, especially in Wisconsin, when the law isn't very clear cut on what they define as defamation. It's a very vague statement. How can you relate to what you learned from the Sullivan and Gertz cases to your future work in the communications industry? This is an interesting question, and I love that it was asked. So how I can relate and what I've learned from both cases, both Sullivan and Gertz cases, is that you always do your research. Never over sensationalize an article for your own personal gain or to fit a narrative. Remember that your words carry weight and can sway public opinion. Your reputation is always on the line, and that if ever you have anything that could be used against you, they will. Make sure that everything that you put out there is actually verifiable by reputable sources as well. And with that, we are done with our presentation. This is my reference page, and if there's anything else I can add to this, I would love to do so. This is a great project, and I learned a lot. Thank you. Have a good night.